is Carl Levin live, a hearing this morning down in D.C. The Senate talking still about the London whale and J.P. Morgan and the trades that went on a year ago. This story is still developing. We're actually finding out some new things this morning, some new color, and we're hearing from executives we have not heard from yet. Morning, this is the Markets Hub. I'm Paul Vigna, here with you on this Friday. We are here with Colin Barr. We're lucky enough to have Colin with us because, I mean, everybody in your group is really covering this story.
Right, it's a big story.
What have you seen so far out of this hearing that you didn't know before?
Well, the hearing raises in the report that they did raise new questions about how about how forthcoming J.P. Morgan has been throughout this whole process. And it's interesting because this is coming out at a time when the Fed yesterday slapped J.P. Morgan on the wrist about the stress test. And the Fed's conclusion was that J.P. Morgan had weakness in its capital planning. And in English, that means that J.P. Morgan was sort of deceiving itself about how it would fare in a downturn. The Fed is saying, you say you would do this well in a downturn. We see no evidence that that's true. Yeah. And that's the same problem that J.P. Morgan had during the whale trade, was that they had models at the company that showed this was going to be a huge problem, and they all had it in their heads that they were smarter than that, and the market was wrong. Right. And so there's a the report makes it clear that there are substantial internal control questions at this company, and J.P. Morgan would insist, that we didn't intend to mislead anybody, and these are all just allegations. But I mean, this, a 300-page Senate report is not something you just brush away. Right.
Now, we heard this morning from Ina Drew, who ran the unit that was responsible for the trade. The trader was in her unit. Right. We heard from her this morning, first time, right? We've heard from her.
Right.
And we're going to run a piece of what she said this morning.
First, the company's new VAR model was flawed and significantly understated the real risks in the book that were reported to me. And second, some members of the London team failed to value positions properly and in good faith. Clearly, mistakes were made.
All right, so Ina Drew there, she took some responsibility. Look, it was her unit. But she also kind of pushed some of the responsibility off of her.
Mistakes were made.
Mistakes
that's not,
were made, yeah.
That's not exactly
it's not original to her.
That's not going to go down in history as one of the more courageous performances. I mean,
right.
the whole thing is that this unit made money for years making these bets, and then the bets got bigger and bigger, and they sort of got out of control. And the issue is that the company did not exercise managerial control over them. And that's, she can say mistakes were made, but she's the one whose job it was to prevent the mistakes from being made. And that's the whole problem with their performance in this, is that they aren't coming out and saying, they're saying we made mistakes, right? They're saying that mistakes were made, but they want, I think in general, their view of this is that there was sort of, not quite rogue trading going on, but people overstepping their bounds. Right. But you can look at it the other way and say, well, that's your job. That's management's job to prevent that from happening, and management didn't prevent it from happening.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned the Senate report. This is what we wrote about on the front page of the paper today, 300-page report about the trades. I think the sort of cynical, immediate thing is to think, oh, well, this is all grandstanding. The hearings this morning are grandstanding, so Carl Levin can get up there and kind of say nasty things about J.P. Morgan.
Yeah.
But is there, and I think the answer is yes, right. Is there a larger issue here that has not been resolved with these banks and how they go about their business?
Well, I think that's right. I think what you're talking about is exactly right. And I think that's why this report has bipartisan support in the panel. John McCain, not known to be a huge basher of the banks, made some very critical comments about sort of management shortcomings in this report. And this comes at a time when people are saying the whole too big to fail thing has become a political issue again. People are saying we need to figure this out one way or another. That doesn't mean it's going to happen immediately. But for instance, with the Volcker rule, this whole episode is going to end with J.P. Morgan backing off what had been a very aggressive position on the Volcker rule. The Volcker rule, which limits how banks can sort of gamble with their own money. And J.P. Morgan is going to make a concession today to Senator Levin, who's been sort of calling for a stricter interpretation. And I think that that's what's happening here, is that J.P. Morgan thought that they had put this to rest in January when they issued their own report. And their report, to my eyes, turns out not to have been nearly as exhaustive as they claimed it was. And so, just one last point, when they came out in May and said we have at least $2 billion in losses, at the point that they said that, they had almost $3 billion in losses.
Right.
And that goes to this whole issue of the culture of are the banks telling us what's actually going on? That's the big question out there in Washington. That's the issue that the banks have to deal with.
All right, good stuff, Colin Barr. Thank you very much. Let's get back to it. And we're covering this, and we're live blogging it on Deal Journal. You can go there to follow everything.